We're on our way to Provincetown, Cape Cod, and I told Pat all about the dunes that are mountains, or mountain dunes. You can kind of see them. Those are all sand dunes. And then you have little like cottages over here. And we're just on our way. Pretty boring drive except this. This is my favorite part of the drive. Like when I get to see all the sand dunes, because that means we're close to where we have to be to park, go to the bathroom.
We'll talk a little later about Eugene O'Neill. His career as a playwright was launched right here in Provincetown. On our left, again, look straight through the building. Another walkway to the water built right through the building. This time you'll notice it leads to a deck looking out over the boats in the harbor. And again, inside that building, you're going to find a couple of terrific little shops. And you're going to find all kinds of tasty things to eat and drink. Take any of those things with you out onto the deck and enjoy that fabulous view. Have you noticed in various spots all around town we set out some benches or chairs where you can stop and rest and relax a little bit. When you do stop and take a little rest, then you're ready to walk a little farther, and that is another way that you can see more of the town than the average person will see.
Just ding the bell.
Sometimes we have to remind people we're not driving on the sidewalk. They're out here walking in the street. And it does get a little tricky around here to find a way to share the roads with all the people that need to use them in various ways. Again, benches where you can rest, relax. You could get a real relaxation moment or two there, have a chair massage, or step inside that neighborhood spa and get the full treatment, the full massage. All around us, if you notice, charming architecture. Beautiful old captain's homes are everywhere you look in Provincetown, and there are no two that look alike. That's another good reason to get off the beaten path a little bit, take a walk up a couple of our side streets just to see what you can see. No two of these old captain's homes look alike, and there are more than 200 of them all around the town. Some have been converted to a restaurant or a guest house or an inn or a gallery. Some are still private homes. Here's one of those on the right-hand side. You notice this old captain's home has rather a large yard by Provincetown standards. But you might find a big old building like that without much room at all for a lawn or a garden. And where do you suppose the parking space for that house might be? Well, most of the time in this town there isn't any parking space. We'll talk about that in a moment. Looks like we might get a few bubbles blowing through the window here. They're celebrating a little bit. And here's a clue for you. Notice the banner or the poster on the side of the building to our left. It's the cover of the Cape Cod Life magazine for the month of June. You'll find it also by looking through the doorway of the florist shop here. Every year in the month of June, editors and readers of Cape Cod Life magazine make their choices for the best of the Cape and Islands. And in Provincetown, they've named 73 award-winning restaurants, shops, galleries, bakeries, beaches, neighborhood museums, family attractions, piano bars, recreation, entertainment, and I could go on and on and on about so many things in every neighborhood that you're going to want to see and do and taste while you're here with us. Try some of the Portuguese specialties in some of our restaurants. The Portuguese ceramic ware here in the West End celebrates the Portuguese heritage of our town. Did you notice through the open doorway you could see their magazine cover? They were an award winner not long ago. We passed an award-winning shop a few moments ago. Here's a clue for you too. In the doorway of this little restaurant, there's the sticker that tells you the Zagat people have been around. They're the folks that rate restaurants all around the world, so we know that one has passed muster. On our left, a little alley. Again, a town landing. Public access to the beach for everybody. Walk down any alley marked Town Landing. That'll put you right on the edge of the harbor. You can go for a walk on the beach, go for a swim, launch a boat or a kayak from a town landing. And in that particular town landing, rent a boat or a kayak or a jet ski. Get out on the water. Or catch the shuttle boat that will take you out to the tip of the Cape at Long Point and the Long Point Lighthouse. And on our left, beyond the Iron Fence, is the U.S. Coast Guard Station. We're grateful to still have the Coast Guard in our town today. Our fishing fleet, of course, is much smaller than it was at the height of our fishing era. But we still have some fishing families in our town making their living from the sea. Hey! Since we have to kind of slowly squeeze by here, this gives me a chance to point out something on the left. This private home these days was one of the early fire stations of our town, and when they remodeled, look what they did. They bricked in enough space in front to make a parking space for themselves, and the old roll-up door of the fire station reveals the front porch they built into their new design for that building. So now they have a front porch, they have a parking space in a spot that had neither of those things. Now that would have never held the big firefighting equipment that we have today. In those days, it would have been a little wooden cart with a pumping device pulled by hand all around the town, right on the edge of the beach. That was the early highway of our town. By the way, on the left, 3 very old buildings, built so close together you could barely walk between them. The roads and streets were built long after the buildings. They didn't have even wagons or horses in those early days because everybody had a little boat to get up and down the shoreline. They did their business and their errands all around town in their little boats. So the early highway of our town was the beach. And the roads and streets and sidewalks came much, much later after most of the buildings had already been built. And a lot of them were simply built just so close together, there simply wasn't room for a little bit of parking between the 2 buildings on the right, for example. And right behind them, you notice there are more houses right behind. So even if you live in this town, you may not have a parking space. On the bicycles, pass us on the right. Get a run at that hill up ahead of us. There you go.
Thank you, darling.
You're welcome. Maddie, got a day off? On our left, out across the harbor, see if you can spot that simple little white lighthouse with a black cap. That's the very tip of Cape Cod at Long Point, and of course the Long Point Lighthouse.
Can we move over to that side? Is that all right?
If you want to change sides, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
The lighthouse is at the very tip of the Cape. Long Point divides Cape Cod Bay on the far side from Provincetown Harbor on the near side. And again, all around us, blue and white plaques. Did you notice the pier that was stretching out toward it? And of course, that is the Coast Guard Pier. Now we've been passing blue and white plaques all along the way. Here's one on the right next to the door, that shows us a boat with a date beneath, telling us that old house was built roughly in the year 1797. Remember, the roads were built long after the houses had already been built, so a couple of houses on the right got a fair amount of space for their front yard because of where they sat when this first road was built. It was 1838 when they built Commercial Street, the first road in Provincetown. Now I'll show you a house just up ahead of us that got only 2 or 3 feet for its front yard because of where the house sat when they built this first road. And it's older than all the other houses. It was waterfront property when it was built. Here on the right, they didn't have much garden space, so they're growing their garden right up the front of the house and onto the rooftop. 72 Commercial Street is the oldest house in Provincetown. Notice some of the individual little window panes look a little bit warped and wavy, a little bit bumpy. Some of those are original window panes, dating all the way back to 1746 when that house was built by ship's carpenter Seth Nickerson. He built it mainly from materials he had salvaged from shipwrecks over the years. On our left, another town landing, access to the beach for this neighborhood. And beyond that houseboat out there is the Long Point Lighthouse. Tough to see right now, so we'll look for it again in a couple of spots along the way. In fact, Provincetown had an early settlement out there on Long Point. It started in 1818, and over the years, 38 houses were built there. Some folks felt like it made sense to live that much closer to the fishing grounds. But by the middle 1800s, the fish had begun to move further off the shoreline year by year, and the whaling industry was beginning to decline in some ways. So a lot of those folks living out at that tip of the Cape there decided they'd rather move back into the main part of town where everyone else had been living all along. But they didn't want to have to build new houses to do that, so what did they do? Look for the plaque on both sides. Can you spot this plaque? It shows a house floating on waves. They floated 25 houses right across the harbor from Long Point. This car is trying to get across the road into their own driveway, and it's a little tricky sometimes, so we'll give them a break. There they go. They can't just drive down the street and make the turn into their driveway. It's so tight, they have to pull out into the parking lot and come at it from a funny angle. It does get tricky around here because, again, no roads or streets or sidewalks, nothing like that at all. In those early days, there would have been a footpath from one neighbor's house to the next nearest neighbor, a footpath to the schools, a footpath to the churches, and that was it. Here's the plaque again on both sides, and beautiful little garden spots all around the town. It was 1850 or so when a builder by the name of Deacon John Dyer figured out how to get those houses out on Long Point up onto rafts and boats and barges. And one at a time, over the years, 25 were floated over. Look down the side of this long red building on the left with the black shutters and notice several sections to the building. The front section, right next to us here at the edge of the road, was the original little house that was floated over. Now look between the branches of the pine tree. There's its plaque. But you have to really look for that one. Of course, the pine tree has grown up over the years. And we passed a few plaques you probably didn't spot at all. Of course, when you're walking, you can take your time. You can look around a tree trunk or two or look between the branches or other obstructions. So you find many more of these and other different sorts of blue and white plaques all around the town. You'll find more of them when you're walking. Here's one more to the right, right above the American flag. That one's pretty easy to spot from the street here. By the way, written accounts of those days tell us in at least one household, apparently in the Cook family, while their house was being floated across the harbor, some of those family members remained in the house and went about their daily chores. To me, that sounds a little crazy. What about you? But crazy or not, that seems to be what the Cook family did. On our left, what a view out over the harbor, or actually right through the dining room, at the historic Red Inn, built in 1805 by Captain Freeman Atkins for his beloved wife, Emily. He built her that beautiful home on the edge of the harbor, which of course the two of them enjoyed the rest of their days. But once the captain and his wife had passed away, and once the house changed owners a time or two over the years, eventually, in the early 1900s, it was owned by a woman who decided she'd like to begin to offer a good meal and a comfortable bed for travelers coming this way in greater numbers year by year. In fact, it was early in the spring of 1915, just as the roses began to bloom, she named it for the roses when she called it the Red Inn, and she became one of those early innkeepers. But I think one of the most important things about the Red Inn is the fact that it sits almost exactly in the spot where the Pilgrims first set foot on dry land. Not in Plymouth, as I was taught in school. Perhaps you were taught the very same thing. Turns out that wasn't exactly accurate. We're going to straighten that out right here. On our left, a little neighborhood park with a sign low to the ground reading Pilgrims First Landing Park. Look for a plaque near the center of the park and it'll tell you the truth about the first landing in the New World of the Mayflower Pilgrims, not in Plymouth at all, but actually way out there ahead of us in the deep water of the far west end of what we call today Provincetown Harbor. November 11th, 1620, the Mayflower Pilgrims dropped anchor way out ahead where the water's quite deep. It came ashore the, well, let's put it this way, it was the 9th of November when they arrived here, but it was a day and a half later when they finally were ready and brave enough to come ashore. That was the 11th of November, 1620, and they came ashore just about where we saw the Red Inn a couple of moments ago, back up around the bend there. But before they even set foot on dry land, all the men gathered in the cabin of the Mayflower, and for the first time of their own free will, together they set down rules that would help them govern their lives together here in the New World, as they called it, and all agreed to abide by those rules. That charter became known as the Mayflower Compact, the forerunner to our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. Of course, the Mayflower Compact was signed aboard the Mayflower, but now you know that wasn't in Plymouth, that was here in Provincetown. A couple of things to point out on the right before we leave this spot. Some folks are out taking a walk on the breakwater. Someone's out there fishing as well. The breakwater serves to slow down the waves and tides coming in and out of the harbor, so as not to damage the fragile wetlands behind us there. Now that was not always the wetlands. In fact, I'm told that was part of the forest in the early days. In fact, that's how the lighthouse to the right got its name. It's called the Wood End Light because it sits just about where the woods used to end, and that's one of two good reasons. The Pilgrims decided they really couldn't stay here. While the Mayflower Pilgrims were anchored out in the harbor to the right there for the 5 weeks they spent here, they sent out 5 different exploring parties, pretty thoroughly covering most of Cape Cod, and they wrote about things they were discovering, so now we know those early pilgrims here found most of the Cape covered with a huge forest of enormous old growth trees. Some of those trees apparently with trunks 4 and 5 feet across, according to the writings of those pilgrims. Some of them were 100 feet and taller. And they also wrote about the lack of tillable soil, open space between the trees. They needed a place to plant a crop. They needed a field, a meadow, a bit of open space where they could fairly easily churn up or till the soil to be able to plant a crop in the coming spring. And of course, Cape Cod didn't offer much tillable soil because so much of it was covered with big trees. And the other obstacle to staying in the harbor back there where they thought they might live, they discovered there wasn't any drinking water within miles from the harbor. As a party of 16 men led by Miles Standish, they discovered a bubbling spring of sweet water, they called it. That was drinkable water, but it was miles from here in the area we call today the town of North Truro, the town just south of Provincetown. Certainly they were grateful to find that spring water bubbling up through the earth, but they were terribly disappointed to find there was no other drinkable water any closer. So again, after only 5 weeks here, the Mayflower Pilgrims moved across the bay, settled instead in Plymouth, and the rest is history. But now you know the truth about the Mayflower Pilgrims' first landing here in Provincetown. A big brown sign on the right a moment or two ago told us we were officially entering the Cape Cod National Seashore. There's wildlife all around us in the sandy hillsides that you're going to find all around us here. And even in the sand just on the side of the road, look for footprints of not only the humans walking out to the beaches, but the tracks of animals as well. They're all around us. Right from the trolley, we've seen deer, fox, raccoon, coyote, rabbit, skunk, turtle, possum. I can name you dozens of others. We'll talk about marine wildlife in a moment, whales for example. Cape Cod National Seashore is essentially a national park surrounded by water. On our left is Herring Cove Beach on Cape Cod Bay. A few moments ago, we were on the west end of Provincetown Harbor, where the Pilgrims made their first landing. A little bit later, we're going to be on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean looking out over Race Point Beach. So those are 3 distinctly different bodies of water surrounding Provincetown, the bay, the harbor, and the ocean. This national park covers about 46,000 acres stretching from Provincetown a good distance up the Cape. But all around us, about 4,000 acres of beaches, ponds, forests, sand dunes, wetlands, and bogs were all part of Provincetown long ago, but became part of the national park system back in the 1960s, as this was becoming a national park. At that time, the federal government took 4,000 acres of our town. We'll talk a little bit more about that just a little bit later on if we have time. Now, if you were to get out there today on the whale watch boat, typically you'd be spotting humpback whales, perhaps finback whales, both technically still listed as endangered species, but not unusual at all to see humpback whales. In fact, it is a very rare whale watch when you go out and don't see a humpback whale. You might see pilot whales, minke whales, schools of dolphin. On your whale watch, you might even spot the most rare of all the great whales in the world. The North Atlantic right whale is so close to extinction, there are fewer than 500 anywhere on Earth. So they're a rare sight around the world, but not unusual at all in Provincetown to see the right whales. Sometimes a young calf or two as well from the whale watch. But even we were surprised several weeks ago, and it made all the newspapers when we had more than 200 right whales right off the shoreline. Nearly half the worldwide population of the most endangered whales in the world were right here, just off the shoreline of Provincetown very recently. If you stop by the Chamber of Commerce, by the way, they might have a coupon to save you each a couple of dollars on your whale watch. And if you noticed, all around us, very tall grasses growing right up out of the sand, particularly near the beach back there. We'll talk about the beach grass just a little bit later on. We're starting to see what we call scrub oaks and pitch pines. They will never be the huge, magnificent trees that were here when the Pilgrims arrived. This is a different sort of oak and pine. And they will never be big trees because they're growing in nothing but sand, just like the beach grass. On the left, beyond the fence there, that's a branch of the paved bicycle path. There are nearly 8 miles, many branches of this paved bike trail. You can very easily rent bicycles while you're here with us, or just get out for a walk as well. On nearly 8 miles, several branches of beautiful paved bike trail winding all throughout this area. In a moment here, we begin to notice some of the beautiful, almost white sand that covers our beaches and dunes. You notice this area isn't exactly sand dunes, but not exactly forest. Again, small trees, the scrub oaks and pitch pines mostly. Some of the bushes we're passing are beach plums, used in making our famous Cape Cod beach plum jelly. Rose hips, full of vitamin C by the end of the summer. On our left, between the trees, there's a little hillside, a little bit of beach grass kind of anchoring that sandy hillside. And if you look way out ahead of the trolley to the right, there it comes, way out ahead to the right in the distance. A much bigger hill of sand, but still not really one of those big dunes. But that grayish-green color on the side of it is the beach grass I was talking about a minute ago, planted by hand, one individual stem of living grass at a time. Seed sprinkled on the sand is not going to grow very well at all. So over the years, we've had to very carefully plant a live stem of grass with a live root, one at a time, inch by inch, and row by row, and planted very carefully. Many of those grasses will survive and eventually send out that tremendous root system that anchors the sandy hillsides. If it weren't for all the plantings we've done over the years, even the biggest of the sand dunes could have simply disappeared on the wind years ago. Of course, the big dunes are way over the hill to the right, about 3 miles. You can't really see them from here. Some of those big dunes had been known to have moved as much as 50 or 60 feet in a single storm. That was long before the park rangers started the planting programs, way back in the 60s and 70s. For about 30, 40 years or so now, we've been carrying on, mostly volunteers, still planting in a few spots out here. Now, the best way to see those big dunes I've been talking about is to take the sand dune tour. Our good friends who operate the Dune Tour in Provincetown are celebrating their 65th anniversary. One of the longest running businesses in Provincetown. They've been driving people out on escorted tours through the dunes now for 65 years. It's a wonderful tour. I highly recommend it. They send people on our tour all day, every day, because we both do a wonderful tour, but each of our tours is different from the other. So you might want to take that Dune Tour while you're here with us. Now, at this point, a lot of people are usually starting to wonder if this was all big forest at one time. What happened to the big trees? How did it turn into sand dunes? And the answer is pretty simple. A lot of mistakes were made by the early settlers all over the Cape and all throughout the years. In every little village, they cut down too many trees all in one spot, and that happened in Provincetown too. Of course, they had to cut down trees to build their houses, to heat their homes, to cook their food. Eventually, they were building boats. By the late 1700s, there were spots all over the Cape without a single tree remaining in sight. But right here at the tip of the Cape in Provincetown, turns out we're sitting on top of about 500 feet of sand and granite below that. And so when they cut down all those huge trees around us here, soon there was nothing left to hold the soil in place. So over a period of years, the soil dried up, blew away on the wind, and of course that exposed all the sand that had always been just below the surface. All around us, the scrub oaks, the pitch pines, the ground cover, the wildflowers, it's all growing, and pretty much nothing but sand. There is scarcely any good, rich, dark soil remaining. Very little of it in the town. Mostly sand is what you find. Except for, of course, the yards and gardens in our town where we've hauled in soil over the years at great expense, I might add. Now here's a terrific spot to visit. This is the Province Lands Visitor Center. The park rangers are here with a number of displays and exhibits, and throughout the day they run several short films about this area. And right on top of the building we just passed, there's an observation deck with a terrific view, and we have the best of the view ourselves right here from the trolley. On the right, beautiful award-winning Race Point Beach runs for miles along the shoreline. We're right on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. Provincetown is 25 miles out into the Atlantic, so we can get some pretty serious storms here, especially in the wintertime. We can get hurricanes as well. And of course, in the 17 and 1800s, they didn't have modern weather predicting devices. That caused an awful lot of shipwrecks. They would sometimes sail right into a big storm they had no way to predict. They didn't have modern navigating equipment on the ships in those days. That caused many shipwrecks. The constantly shifting sands all around our shoreline can sometimes form sandbars several miles off the shoreline. That caused hundreds of shipwrecks over the years. The result was that for many reasons there were so many shipwrecks on the shoreline of the Cape that it became known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. There were more than 3,000 recorded shipwrecks on the shoreline of Cape Cod. Down near the beach, you might have noticed a shingled wooden building. Looks a little like a church from the shape of it, a lot of people say. Actually, that's not a church. That's the Old Harbor Life-Saving Station, the last remaining life-saving station from the old shipwreck days. It's a museum now, dedicated to telling the story of the U.S. Life-Saving Service, the forerunner to today's Coast Guard. Visit that museum when you visit Race Point Beach. To the left of it, maybe you notice a couple of big white buildings with red roofs near the beach. Today they house the National Seashore Park Rangers in some of their offices. Now as we round the bend here, we're going to see out ahead of the trolley as we round the bend, back toward the center of town, two big landmarks. We'll talk about the Pilgrim Monument and that big water barrel to the right of it there in just a moment. First though, notice there's a low spot just beyond the sidewalk here, but beyond the road, there's a much lower low spot. I'm going to call it a valley for the lack of a better word. And that little valley is actually just about at sea level, so that's where the water pools up in the early spring. It's one of many spots like that, where the water table is just below the surface, because it's just about at sea level. So that means when the rains come in the early spring, sometimes the water will pool up, and it might take 2 or 3 months for the ground there to be able to absorb all that water. But there's a benefit to that flooding that goes on all around us here. Walk down into those very low spots in a couple of months around the end of the summer and find cranberry bogs, completely wild and natural. Cranberries grow very well all throughout this area, but always down in those very low spots of the forests and the dunes where the water pools up in the spring. Hence the name Cranberry Bog. The Pilgrim Monument was built to commemorate the Pilgrims' first landing, which we all now know was right here in Provincetown. It stands 252.5 feet tall. It's the tallest all-granite structure in the United States. Inside are a series of ramps and steps we can quite easily climb right up to the top of the Pilgrim Monument. That is a fun thing to do. The climb takes the average person about 10 minutes. The view from the top is spectacular for miles in all directions. And of course, you don't have to climb to the top of the monument to visit it. You'll all want to visit the museum at the base of the Pilgrim Monument. Some wonderful exhibits there. By the way, we're now driving through one of my very favorite spots anywhere on Cape Cod. It's called Beech Forest, named for the beech tree. As you notice, though, there aren't only beech trees, quite a variety of trees in Beech Forest. The paved bike trail is on our left, kind of winding through the forest. And there's quite a bit of wildlife out this way. In the last few days, we've had to stop a couple of times to let a turtle or two cross the road. For some reason, we're having an awful lot of baby bunnies right now. And we've seen 2 families of Canadian geese raising their young chicks. The reason I know they're 2 different families is because the chicks are a very different size from one another. So there are actually 2 families of Canadian geese living in the pond over the hill to the right. We've seen wild turkeys out this way, so if you drive out this way, please drive a little slowly, a little carefully. Watch out for the wildlife. It's all around you. Coming up on the right in a moment, a little road that leads to parking and picnic areas, some wonderful little walking trails. The paved bike trail goes right through Beech Forest as well. another great spot to park the car, get out onto some of these wonderful trails. And just at the end of this road, you're going to find that pond where those geese are making their home. Now, technically, we're still within the forest, but actually, we're crossing kind of an invisible boundary line just about here between what's officially considered Provincetown ahead of us and what was once Provincetown, but now part of the national park behind us. The federal government took those 4,000 acres back in the 1960s. And so, well, here comes the shuttle bus. That's a great way to get around. They swung a little wide to get around an obstacle there, so we gave them plenty of room to get around. You can get all around the town and out into the national park and even to the resorts and campgrounds in North Truro by taking the shuttle bus. A very inexpensive way to get where you're going. And then, of course, you don't have the struggle and the cost of parking when you take the shuttle bus. Now, I was mentioning that the boundaries of our town changed considerably back in the 1960s. These days, Provincetown itself is only about a mile wide officially.